Welcome to the Long Range Pursuit Podcast, presented by Gunwerks, where we learn about and share long-range shooting techniques, science, and gear.
All right, guys, I'm still on the airplane kick, so have a pretty good discussion planned this morning about checklists. So I'm a pretty big fan of checklists when I'm flying. I like to make sure I don't forget anything. I think it's a very vital part of aviation in general, especially general aviation, where pilots are maybe not as frequent users as commercial, and then you get into aviation where you're flying people around and they're counting on you. I think it becomes even more valuable, because you're responsible for other people's in that case as well. So I think I've seen a lot of parallels in checklist usage in aviation and kind of the way that we've approached checklist usage in shooting. And I think when it comes to executing a long shot, there are a lot of things that you have to do right. Just like in aviation, like there's a lot of things you have to do right. And sometimes, you can drop one or two things and maybe the outcome's okay. But I think it's vital that we kind of approach that development, that skills development, and that system so that we can achieve good outcomes, whether we're flying or shooting, by using checklists. So maybe we could just start off a little bit. When I'm flying, I have 4 checklists that I'll go through when I am setting up and getting up in the air in my airplane. So from a kind of like a pre-flight, a good walk around on the plane, and then checking, lubrication, fuel, control surfaces, just overall function, you making sure nothing's out of whack. That pre-flight is a checklist. I jump in the plane, I've got a checklist for startup. I've got a checklist for my avionics and programming, and then have a run-up checklist that sets me up for takeoff. When I'm descending into land, I've got another 4 checklists that I run through. And what I've noticed is that it's very easy to kind of get in this routine where maybe you're not utilizing your checklists, you'll breeze through them pretty good. And, that happened for me about probably within this last month. I've been flying a lot, and so the familiarization with the plane and the systems and the processes is getting pretty strong. And I've kind of noticed this reliance on the checklist is starting to come down. And I just wanted to point out a really good example. I flew over to Driggs this weekend with my wife. We went to a music festival and flew over real early one morning, flew back real early because we're crossing the Absarokas and pretty big mountains here. When we went to take off, it was runway 4. There was just a little bit of tailwind on that runway, but I'm taking off right in the direction that I want to go. So kind of checked my runway distances, and, I already had a good weight and balance, fuel, everything's good. And so I'm going to just add, what I need to add to my takeoff distance for just a slight tailwind, like a couple knots. And, went through the whole process, got everything set up, flight plans in, got out there to take off. It's a small, uncontrolled airport, so announcing to the common traffic frequency. And went through my run-up routine, which is mostly just to make sure all the engine systems were working, and configured the plane for takeoff, and then pulled out there and took off. And I noticed when I was taking off, usually you can kind of feel when the plane's ready, right? You've got a little elevator, pressure on, and you're just going until the plane, you can tell it just wants to go. And in this case, I was going a lot faster than I normally do on takeoff, and I had to apply just a little bit more elevator than what I'm used to. And I was just thinking, okay, well, maybe that's that tailwind, because I'm usually really good about takeoff into the wind, land in the wind, etc. I just want to crowd all the odds. So, on the climb out, I go to do my kind of climb checklist, my flow, and I noticed that I didn't have my 10 degrees of flaps. Almost always I'm taking off with 10 degrees of flaps in my 182, and in this situation, I didn't have that configuration done. Kind of rushed through that setup. I just did just a quick glance at the checklist and made sure I had those things done, but I missed that one configuration step. And it's all good. It's maybe like adjusting your parallax, where you can still make a good shot, but it could have been a little bit better maybe if you had zero parallax. So I'm going to chalk that up as a learning experience. The review of that checklist or that catch, kind of, gave me a little wake-up call, or a little bit of a reminder that, hey, look, the checklists are there for a reason. You need to go through those line by line and make sure they're good, because every one of those things that I've put on that checklist are important. So let's tie that to shooting. There's a lot of checklists that you could create for a shooting environment. I feel like one of my real solid checklists is kind of a preparatory, or call it pre-shot checklist. It's very gear oriented, and I'm looking for some guidance or some automaton, rangefinder kit, wind meter kit, rifle kit, bipod, ammo, like do I have my gear assembled? And then also part of that is, do I have the right ballistic program in the rangefinder? Do I have a backup, ballistic methodology? Wind meter doesn't get used a lot, but do I have one of those available? Are the batteries fresh in my equipment? A handful of little preparatory items like that are pretty valuable in terms of making sure that that could be like a prep for the range, could be a prep for a hunt, it could be even like the day that you're walking out of the tent and you're hiking up on the mountain. What equipment have I prepared for, or have I brought with me, and am I ready? Even as far as if you're shooting or hunting with somebody, designating who's got first shot, who's got spotter duties, right? Who's in charge of wind, like all of those things kind of sorted out and ready. You kind of dive into that pre-shot routine. In my opinion, a lot of the pre-shot routine is about being aware of your conditions. When I'm hiking or hunting, I'm always analyzing the atmospherics. I'm looking at wind, I'm looking at terrain, I'm looking at, what is the temperature doing, what are the thermals doing, and I'm kind of pre-assessing that. So if there is action, that setup and that flash to bang, so to speak, is much faster, and you don't get caught out, without that general sense of awareness, getting a little myopia, focused on maybe too small of details when it's time to shoot. So you've got this routine of kind of getting set up. I really feel like picking a good spot, having good equipment organization and management so you can get set up well and quickly. I think that's a part of that routine. One of the things that I think is really important is, going through some process the same over and over again, which that repetition, that consistent repetition also can teach us about, how to execute, and then I'll build some muscle memory or some subconscious actions from our specific steps that we're looking for to be successful. I think that a vital part of checklists is the ability to go back and review, call it an after action report of how did we do. And generally we find that success comes from, successfully executing all of those items on our checklist. And so when we have failures, identifying where did we fail. And I think that failure identification is also a great way to build and refine a checklist. Generally, I find that I have a handful of things that I need to do consciously every time that I shoot or take off. Maybe flaps is one of those, but I need to do those things and consciously call it out and consciously do it. And I think that's where that really hard line on a checklist is important. The actual execution of the shot is even more important to have dialed in to where everything kind of cascades from the go decision. And that one I feel like is really, really vital to identify, the different things that you need to do once you're kind of in that zone, and then practice at least enough to be able to execute that without having to, sidebar and consciously think about do this, do this, do this. That is probably one of the biggest reasons why it's important to practice with your equipment, why it's important to set up for longer range shots, to try to find stressful scenarios, because once you hit a time crunch or the trophy crunch, then sometimes a lot of our systems and process fall apart. Like that stress can destroy your subconscious's ability to kind of follow through on, a known checklist or a known system or a routine. So I think this is where that Hunter Series type match is really valuable, because it puts you in a time crunch. You have to execute a lot of factors and variables. I think sometimes when you're practicing, you can set up some scenarios that can simulate that. Maybe even with a buddy, where you can get that shooter spotter routine going, and you can put together some different games on, range, dial and shoot. When you're done shooting, there's also a few things that you should do as a shooter. I think a lot of those are safety oriented, but some of them are setup oriented. Here's a good example. We've got this hunt up here near Cody, where if you get the timing right, you get the right weather and the right rut conditions, you can hike up the mountains. What we'll usually do is drive up the North Fork. We'll pick out a couple saddles, and we'll climb up. Usually you're like a 2-3 mile hike in. You get up high in a saddle, and then you get a big coverage of country to look at, and you'll have this awesome mule deer migration happen, where all day you'll just have bucks and does and deer just streaming out of the mountains on their way to where they want to get together and have rut activity. There's that transition in that October period where they go from their high country range to the rutting range, and that snow system at the right time will just, everybody's like, I'm done, I won out. I remember one time we just absolutely nailed the timing perfectly. Mike was there, his oldest stepson was there, Ethan, and I was there, and we were set up on, a really good ridge system. We could have deer come below us, and then we had 3 main spots away from us at distance where we could find deer on an opposing face, and then up the draw that we were on, and then across a fold. And we had action. We had some really great action that day. And I remember getting on a deer that started out at like 600 yards, and he was right there. We got set up. We had snow on the ground, couldn't quite get the right setup. Deer didn't quite stop for us. He was up at 800, and I dialed up to that distance, and then he pushed a little further, and he disappeared in the trees, and then it looked like he might pop out in this clearing at about 11:20. Got dialed up, got set up, and it never did quite work out. And, there was probably a few minutes there where you're just on absolute high alert. You're super excited. All the adrenaline's flowing, action's happening. You might be behind, the animal or the situation. And so you're trying to catch up. And then there was this letdown afterwards where it just didn't happen. And it was a big enough buck that it was a letdown. It was kind of a bummer that we missed that opportunity. And then all of a sudden, on a hillside about 800 yards away, big open face, there's another big deer. And we're talking big framed, 20-inch wide, heavy, mature, mountain muley. And I haven't tipped over as many mule deer as Mike. I was pretty excited about that. And it's pushing up that face. And I've hunted enough deer. I've killed a lot of small ones, but I've hunted enough deer. I knew exactly what was going to happen. He was kind of reach that top where he was, done climbing, big old heavy mountain buck. He's going to reach that top and he was going to just take a minute and blow and kind of check his surroundings and see what was going on. I knew I had a shot opportunity. So I'm anticipating, I get tripod set up. I'm sitting on my butt. It's going to be about an 850-yard shot. We had pre-ranged, we had our wind figured out, dialed in, got set up, and had that moment of truth. He did exactly what I thought. I pulled the trigger and I sent one 20 feet over his back and immediately knew what happened. He, finished up, stepped over the hillside, stepped into the timber, and he was gone. I had that one opportunity. Just absolutely would have been awesome. I was probably even picturing the walk up and the congratulations there at the end on an awesome big buck. Because an 800-yard shot's doable, with those conditions that we were in. And I'd forgotten to dial the turret back down, and so I was in whole revolution up over the deer and just absolutely blew the shot, just absolutely choked. And that memory of that has burned itself into my memory, and I'm really, really good about dialing my turret back when I'm done and checking zero. I mean, that's a big part of the advantage of a smart scope like the Radical, where you've got the distance displayed, through the view of the scope right in front of you. You can never be 2 revs off because you can see you would be at 1,400 yards. And so you would bring it back to the right distance. But I think, something like, dialed back to zero at the end of a shot sequence, and then, starting from zero, dial your turret at the beginning of a shot sequence. Those are 2 little things that you can add that are super valuable. And, I just wanted to just throw out some more pre-shot checklist ideas that, could be valuable. Here's one I found from somebody online that does some competitions. So this is a competition related one. Adjust rifle on ground to point at first target, mag in. Now that's a great idea. We do that hunting. It's like you get on target, you line up left and right, set the gun down so that when you get in behind the gun, all you have to do is find vertical. And usually I'm pointing high so that all I have to do is one movement to lift the gun up into position, bring that bag up the buttstock, and then I'm on target. It's a very fast way to find it. Square your shoulders to target, get down on the rifle, body angle 0. A lot of this is positional stuff. Position, shooting hand on grip rifle, rifle button, shoulder pocket, shooting hand pressure straight to rear at rifle weight, see target just over top of scope, get on target through scope, load bipod, adjust rear bag, cheek weld, fine-tune body alignment to natural point of aim on target, fine-tune parallax, close bolt, position shooting finger on trigger, attain predetermined wind hold, level reticle, squeeze shot at natural respiratory pause, follow through, hold trigger, call the shot impact, rack bolt for next shot, or move on to next target. So a lot of those really coincide with mine. There's a couple there that are super important. That follow through on a rifle system, that pressure on the bipod, those 2 are probably the 2 most common causes of misses that I've seen hunting. If you don't follow through, you pick your head up after the shot, always drives the gun down. You don't preload the bipod, or at least push it forward to the wall. The bipod will hop. It'll drive a shot high. If you're floating the rear bag, you don't have your rear bag set and you're lifting the stock off the bag. When you shot, butt stock will drop. You'll shoot high. So a lot of those checklist items are there to help overcome, errors that will develop if you don't follow those steps, those processes. So I think what I would recommend when it comes to developing a checklist is at least you have at least 3. One of them's pre-shot, like this is equipment management. This is all the stuff that you can go through that you have lots of time to think about. You have this shooting checklist, and that's a lot more like what I just read for you, where this cascading set of events where you've made this go decision, you have to execute these things. That's the one that I feel like you need to write it out, you need to develop it, you need to practice it, you need to find where you fail, and you can refine that list. And the goal is to keep shooting and practicing until that list happens automatically, subconsciously, so that when you say it's go time, you can make all those things happen without having to mentally think about it, consciously think about it. And I think what you'll find is, for most of us that don't shoot all the time, is that you're going to have a handful of things that stick out that you always need to think about. Like, we're just not going to be pro or expert enough that we can just forget about it. We can just eliminate it, subconscious, the whole thing. So what you'll find is that your checklist becomes really long to start with, and as you develop your systems, it's going to be a short handful of things, maybe an acronym or something like target parallax dial or something like that helps you remember and to overcome those things that you have a tendency to forget when it's go time, when it's shot time. And then kind of that post-shot process, kind of that follow-through. And I really like things like I like to check chamber, make sure my chamber's clear, make sure everything's safe, make sure everything's stowed correctly. I think there's a safety aspect of that is very vital, and probably can get infused into all aspects of our shooting checklists. So I think, let's see, let me double check my list here. I think I covered everything I wanted to. Oh, by the way, I think that the idea of a checklist is essentially a recipe that you can follow for success. So you can apply the same thing in cleaning. Let's say your cleaning routine, your data collection, like when you're validating a gun or truing a gun or double checking a gun, building a system or a step-by-step process that you follow to achieve a successful outcome. It doesn't hurt in any one of those operations. And what I've found is that by creating the checklist and following that checklist religiously, is it takes a lot of the responsibility off your shoulders to remember and to memorize and to, I've seen guys do it where they're cleaning the gun and they kind of do the last steps first, and then they have to go back to the first steps and they get it all mixed up. And so just having that there, you could just put it on just like we do dope cards on guns, you put your data or your checklist on a card and just stick it to the side of your rifle cradle, and there you've got a visual 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to get it done. Okay, when it comes to action, practice till you can do it instinctively. I think we covered that pretty well. I like to always review my checklist in an after action. So you go through it and then you say, well, how did I do? Even when you're successful, it's like, okay, did that. That went really well. Hey, I could have done better in this situation. The after action on a checklist can teach you a lot for, the next thing, the next time, the next practice session, the next opportunity for a shot. Okay, cool. I think I covered everything I wanted to there on checklists, and we'll gather up for another topic soon. Thanks for listening to our podcast, and if you have any questions or requests on topics, make sure and send them in, and we'll consider that and give you some good dope.
If you like what you're hearing here, please take a second and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. We appreciate your feedback and suggestions for topics you'd like discussed or questions you want answered on the podcast. You can reach out on Facebook or Instagram or send us an email to podcast@gunwerks.com. Also, be sure and check out our full offering of long-range gear at gunwerks.com. Use promo code LRP for free shipping on any order.